Well, hello. I'm Christopher Schwarzen. I'm here again with my wife, Heather Schwarzen.
Hello.
I'm glad you're with me again.
Thank you.
3 of these, and you're still here.
I am.
Good.
Yes.
Well, listen, we've been talking with you about getting fathers more involved in homeschooling, right?
Absolutely.
This is part 4 of a 4-part series. We're going to wrap things up today. We've talked about easing your husband into it, trying to get his attention toward homeschooling. We've talked about how dads can be involved, especially in terms of helping pick curriculum. And then last session, we talked a lot about, well, that's just not good enough. You're also responsible, Dad, for part of the schooling. And so we talked about looking and using your own skills and talents to provide some educational component to the homeschooling at your house. And we've also talked about being prepared to do things that you're not comfortable with as God has called you, and how that can be a great experience, not just for your children to see you work at something new, to learn yourself, to learn from your mistakes, learn from you do what you do well, but just showing them that they shouldn't be afraid to try new things, right?
We also talked about how that can be a great relationship builder between fathers and their children, and add a dimension that most dads sadly just kind of let pass by them. They don't know their kids in that way, but through homeschooling, how you can be a part of even more of the character shaping work that God is doing in their lives.
Right, exactly. Especially, I think, sometimes as children get older, and as we would say, oh, well, you know, they have to be on their own. They have to figure that out on their own. I don't know. I don't know that they have to now, do they?
And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. We are talking about the bigger picture.
Right. 2 things that we want to discuss in full with you today. One is doing it all for the Lord, that everything that we do is supposed to be turned back to the Lord and done for the Lord. And secondly, doing it all over again. Let's assume that you have more than one child at your house, and if you don't, that there is still doing it all over again in other ways as well. And
Absolutely.
We want to talk about homeschooling families with multiple children, but also getting involved in other aspects and components of homeschooling, even when your children are grown and you don't have any. You just feel the call.
Right.
All right. Well, how do you want to start today? You want to start about which piece you think?
Well, let's start by talking about doing it all for the Lord. What that
Excellent.
means, what that looks like, and starting at the ground floor, that means looking forward and knowing that this thing that you're working on is the big picture. The thing that you're working on actually is so much bigger than teaching your child math and science and reading, that what you're actually doing is laying the foundation for God's ultimate fulfillment of purpose in that child's life.
Right. I call it purpose planning. You call it
Vision. Having vision casting.
vision casting, purpose planning. Call it what you want. But the whole point here is that our children are really not our own children, right? They belong to the Lord. They were given to us from the Lord. And so we have been given a responsibility to train them up to be prepared for the work and the role that the Lord has created them for before they were born. Remember, we go back to Ephesians 2:10 on that. And we've said, all people have been born and created with purpose, right?
Right. And by homeschooling, you are being given a role in that development of purpose. You're not giving them purpose. That's already been done. That's not your job. And sometimes we forget that that's not our job. Sometimes we'll see a child who's maybe a little wayward or reluctant to grab on to any passion. And we think, I just need to do this. I just need to do that. But ultimately, when you've had purpose planning, as Christopher calls it, what you need to do is point them back to God, because that's where their purpose comes from.
Right. I think sometimes it's easy to look at our children and go, oh, I could so see you doing this
Right.
In your living, in your life. Or I could so see you not doing this.
And sometimes we're right. And God does give us
absolutely.
incredible insight into our kids, which frustrates them sometimes to bits, because we see something in them that they can't feel yet. But we are not the people, again, who have developed that purpose. We are just the people that get to help lay the groundwork that points them towards it.
Yes, eventually their path with God is going to be their own. Their relationship with God is their own. And while we still, as mom and dad, never give up our responsibility to step in and say, hey, son or daughter, what are you doing to follow the Lord's path here? Have you prayed through this decision? Have you spoken to others about it? That is always our role to the day we breathe our last breath, right? I don't believe we ever give that up. At no point in time do we say, oh, they're such and such age now, they're on their own. I just don't believe it. I don't see it in the Bible. I know they have to live their own life, and God has called them to their own purpose, but and let me be clear, I'm not suggesting in any way that you're constantly directing them at a point.
No. You're just utilizing the role that God has given you as someone who can share some wisdom, some experience. You know, it's not an accident that this child is in your family. I know that we've said that in previous episodes, but it's not an accident, and therefore, you know, the Lord has a long-term purpose in everyone in your family, your children and their relationships together, you and your relationships with them, extended family members and their relationship. There's a purpose there that you want to keep in mind as you are in second grade and you're looking forward to high school graduation, but you really shouldn't be. What you should be looking forward to is the rest of their life.
The rest of their life. And as I get older and I continue to read through the Bible, I see more and more how God talks about the generations.
Yes.
That it doesn't simply end with me helping my son or daughter find their purpose. It is laying the groundwork so that they are then prepared to help lay the groundwork and help their son or daughter find their purpose, and that becomes an easy transition. Not that raising children is easy, it's not, but we're not fumbling along thinking, well, they're just on their own now.
Right.
And I know it was saying that, probably some of you are listening right now, and you've done that. You've said, well, he's 16, on your own kind of thing, or 17.
Right. I don't have any power to speak over him at this point. He's making his own choices.
And we're not going to agree with you on that. And again, I don't see it in the Bible.
I don't see it biblically, and I think that that is a infiltration of the world's view of quote unquote independence coming into our Christian parenting, where really what we should be saying is the Lord is calling him to something. And I'm no longer the central person responsible for his relationship with God, which you never were, but you felt like it. When a child is 6, it's very easy to be the one that is giving them. You are the one giving them that spiritual milk. You are the one that is giving them the little bits and pieces of wisdom about God and who he is. And you are the one filtering all that to them. And yes, by the time that they are 16, they need to be wrestling with some of that. And it's not always going to be pretty. No. They're going to have some big questions. They're going to get angry. They're sometimes going to, just flat out say, I don't think I believe any of this. I'm not sure. And yeah, if you're sitting there and saying, that's not my responsibility to wrestle, you're right. You don't wrestle with their faith for them. You stand near them and encourage them and keep pointing them back to Christ while they're doing it.
Absolutely. All right. So if you're with us so far and you've followed through these last 3 podcasts and now you're listening to this 4th one, congratulations to you on it, I think. Because it says, hey, I hear the Lord calling me and my family to doing things maybe differently than you have been, or you're using this hopefully as an encouragement to go, you know what, we're on that path. But as Heather was saying, we're doing it all for the Lord. Heather pointed out that we don't necessarily have a direct line on what our children are to become and what they are to do for the Lord. We can see and sense, and the Lord will give us direction as we're prayerful about how to educate them and train them up as to where we should lead them. Remember, one of the blessings about homeschooling is that you don't have to do the same thing with each child, right?
Right.
It's not That's not how it is. And I don't want to, we're going to get to that in just a second. But what I want to say is that if you have acknowledged that you are doing it all for the Lord, then you're also trusting that He's going to sustain you and see it through as well.
That to me is the biggest part of knowing, doing it all for the Lord. If you are in the midst of any day homeschooling your children because you think it's the right thing to do, because you're afraid of the public school system, because you don't want your children to participate in A, B, and C, because you don't want them to hear X, Y, and Z, because you think that they'll be better scholars, better Christians, won't do drugs, whatever it is, then you are going to have days where you are going to want to shove them on a school bus and never see them again. However, if you are laboring for the Lord, you're still going to have those moments, but you're going to say, I'm doing this for you, Lord. I'm doing this because it is a calling from you, and you will continue on.
Right.
You will.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have had those days.
We have had those days. And
probably with every child in our house. I'm putting you on the bus tomorrow.
Are you sure that we aren't going down to the school tomorrow to just walk around and see if maybe this is a better fit for you? Because I can tell you I would get more laundry done without you in my life. But when you know your reason for doing it, then getting up early to teach your child French before school or before you go to work suddenly is a worthwhile endeavor.
Or coming home in the afternoon and trying to finish up some science experiment that your child needs help with to better understand, I don't know, climate or something, you're going to do it. You're going to make that effort, and the Lord is going to help you find that little extra energy to get it done. I strongly believe in that.
Right.
I really do. When you are handing it over, turning it over, making sure that it is about Him and Him only, it's going to come through.
Absolutely.
It's going to come through. And so, again, we call that purpose planning, doing it all for the Lord, knowing that the prep you're giving your children, assuming you've been prayerful throughout. Remember, it has got to be a prayerful endeavor. Can't really hear the Lord speak to you if you don't have a strong prayer life. But if you've been prayerful throughout, assuming that you've been prayerful, the prep you're giving your children will ready and steady them for the work that He has created them to do. Mm-hmm. And that's a powerful thing. Again, we stand before Him someday, and we want Him to say, well done with what I gave you. It's the parable of the talents. I gave you this or I gave you that. What is the return that I see? And our children, they are those talents. They are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's say you have more than one child in the house, right? And what we just said a second ago was that the beauty of homeschooling is that, as we know for the Lord, all people are created individually,
They are all created as individuals. And there's a saying out there, don't reinvent the wheel. You know how it's done, don't reinvent the wheel. Take the path of least resistance. That does not hold true in homeschooling.
No.
It does not. Sometimes you reinvent the entire wheel, and other times you just have to reinvent parts of the wheel, but your children were each created for a specific purpose that is individual to them.
Right.
And if you are doing your job of praying over them, of listening to the passions and to the interests and to the talents and gifts that the Lord has given them, either by just you listening through prayer or by you observing your children, you are going to find that you are going to have to constantly be extending yourself, reaching beyond what you thought you knew to keep these people engaged and on the path and moving forward.
Right. I think we end with this bit of advice, if you want to call it that, because I think even in our own life, we have done something that worked out so well with one of the children, and then you say, well, that was good, that really worked well. The next child is moving into that, let's go ahead and start it, and all of a sudden going, what is going wrong here? And it is hard. Let's be honest, people, we're like boats. It is hard to steer us in a different direction once we get going. And it's to be able to say, I think we just need something different. Now, I'm not advocating flitting from one little thing to the next. And
No, because I think constancy, the act of being consistent, is vital.
Absolutely.
In education. I think that sometimes we confuse richness, the ability to have this full feast in front of us that we take bits and pieces from as we are able, and we confuse that with, oh, I see this math curriculum, oh, but this one, oh, but this one, oh, but that one. And just every year or every 3 months of a school year, flipping over entirely what we've done. There are many, many people, and I think this will be a topic for later, but there are curriculum addicts. And, that is not what we are advocating here.
No, what we're advocating is recognizing the fact that one thing that works for one child in your house isn't necessarily going to work for the next because they were not created the same. Yes, we're all created in the image of God, but again, God has given us different talents and skills, given us different direction, created us for different purpose, and so it's not going to be one size fits all. It can't be.
No.
My goodness, life would be so boring.
I remember, one of the greatest examples in our personal homeschooling lives about this particular topic is when Jack, who is now 15, started reading. And we already had 2 children who were reading. And I did exactly what I did with them, which is I would put in library holds through our fantastic library system of all of these fabulous books that I had gotten recommendations from, actually from a Clarkson book, Educating the Wholehearted Child. I love that.
I remember that book, yes. Spent a lot of
Reading
time
for the
in
Wholehearted
house.
Child. There you go. It's Sarah Clarkson's. And I brought home all these books, and he didn't read them. And I thought to myself, well, they're just as engaging and wonderful as they were the first 2 times. Why isn't he reading them? And then I actually stopped for a minute and I looked at this child and I realized, well, he's not reading these books because Jack's love does not line up with what I'm putting in front of him. First of all, Jack's love are huge art coffee table books. Jack loves any kind of art, design. He loves history, but he loves it to be real history, not necessarily fictionalized accounts of history.
Right.
He wants to look at photographs of things that have, been there. He wants to read real life stories and adventures and things of that nature. I had to reinvent my wheel.
Well, the interesting thing is, people think, well, there's nothing to read in, coffee table books. Actually, it's not really true. We usually get, you and I used to get coffee table books just to look at the pictures and just avoided all the text. But
Right.
Jack he'd
reads
read them
text.
cover to cover.
Jack will to this day. One book that he has out right now is on modern design in furniture. And he finds it fascinating, and he's, he was sitting there telling me about this particular Bauhaus school architect. And to him, that's incredible. And to him, that is an amazing engagement with the talents and gifts that God has given him. If I had put anything like that in front of his brothers and sisters, they would have said, no, this isn't doing it for me. I don't understand. So I had to break out of the mold that I had created.
Just do it a little differently.
Do it a little
Still
differently.
encouraging to read. We never sat there and said, well,
he's not a reader.
Reading. Right.
You're not a reader.
Right.
And I just had a conversation the other day with someone who, said that her kid just doesn't do math. Well, that's just not an option. You just got to do math.
Got to do math.
Are there some people who respond differently to different math curricula. Absolutely. That is why there are some that are more hands-on, some that are computer-based, some that are more, life-based. Just because you've invested the money in one program, don't ever expect that you are going to get to divide that investment by however many children that you have.
No, listen.
If you
if
can,
you get
that's
to,
great.
that's great. But you also have to be prepared to say, I've got to do it differently with this one.
Yep.
I can't force them into a box. And listen, that's exactly one of the main reasons that so many of us have chosen homeschooling, because we've acknowledged that one of our children or more of our children just wouldn't fit in to the box that a public or a private school is in terms of curriculum. We've said, hey, we have choices here. So let's remember to make sure we're utilizing our choices. Again, that dependent upon the child and the way that they learn. And I know that's maybe tough at first as you start to get into schooling with one of your children. If you're a new homeschooler, you're trying to figure out what you're teaching and what's your best method for teaching, what's their best method for learning. And I think, though, dads and moms, it's dependent upon us to change what we're doing in order to help them accomplish what they need to accomplish.
Because if you do anything else, then you are just recreating school at home. What's the purpose there?
It's not. You can check your box off and say it's done for the day, but this is supposed to be a welcome, warm learning environment, and it is supposed to be one of growth, not just for your individual child, but for your entire family. And so, dads, listen to this. Homeschooling isn't just about getting your kid through grade school, high school. We would advocate stick with it through high school.
Absolutely.
But dads, this is about growing your family in a way that the Lord will use you. You will see such abundant blessing when, again, you make it about Him always. And in making it about Him, it turns these difficult situations into open doors.
Absolutely. You are going to see that your family can be used so much more as a body, that you are going to be multiplied, that you are going to reach out to people and be able to handle and minister in circumstances that just one of you would never be able to do. But that requires viewing each person as an individual with gifts. Now, one word of caution there.
Go on, please.
If you have someone in your family that maybe has a gift that no one else has, you need to, I believe, be prayerful and be keenly tuned in so that that person doesn't decide that they have been labeled as different from everybody else in the family. You need to make sure that that's a positive thing for them, and that you are constantly saying that what they have is a gift. I have heard of and experienced children who are maybe more artistic and they're the only one in the family, or one who is very mathematically inclined and everybody else in the family would rather be sitting around reading books. And you need to make sure that they see that not as how they are different from the rest of you, but as how they are blessed by God to have a very specific gifting and calling that has great purpose and will have a beautiful footprint in God's kingdom.
Well, there are certain things that even when children have unique skills and talents, there are still things that we as a family, especially again here, Father, speaking to you, that we must have in common, and that is the love of the Lord. And so if, again, we're doing this with God first and foremost, then this is what we're teaching our children, that regardless of your skill and talent, it has been given to you by Him for His glory. And it doesn't matter whether you're good or bad at art, good or bad at reading, that whatever it is the Lord calls you to do, trust that when you put forth the effort, you'll be equipped to do it.
Absolutely.
And, one of those basics is if you don't have Bible time as a family, you need to get it, because everybody needs to be good at reading and moving through the Bible, right? And we've got to have time together as a family to study the Bible. So I totally understand what you're saying, Heather, about, somebody with a very unique talent, but there are ways within the family to say, hey,
Binding everybody together.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, binding everybody together. You need to have that common thread in your family culture that says, but I'm a Schwarzen, I'm a, whatever.
Right.
I belong to this family. And homeschooling will definitely help you to cultivate that. It will give you a unified sense of identity, but it is something that you have to constantly keep watering and pruning and growing.
It's important to recognize the importance of family dynamic, and especially when you read the Old Testament. How many times in the Old Testament, as the Lord has led the Israelites out of Egypt, has He set them aside, have them stop, and count themselves out as families? It happens multiple times. And when we read past that point, we're continually told of the genealogies of the 12 tribes. And when we get to the Gospels, we're given Jesus's genealogies as well. Family is so important to the Lord that it is so well documented in the Bible as we read through it. And I know we're like, I don't know why I need that, but I think it gives us a really good indication of what God means by family and generations. And
the fact that it matters.
That it matters.
If he keeps pointing back to it, then it matters.
Absolutely. And I know that we say, as a family, when we go places, we make sure that we have a quick little saying where we say, hey, you represent the Lord first. At this point, you represent the family next. And then you represent yourself.
Right.
And that's not to put pressure on them, but it is to help them prioritize that at this point in their life, because they live under our roof and are still under our guidance and tutelage, that they have a responsibility to God, they have a responsibility to their family, and that it's their own self that comes last in that, trying to teach that selflessness that will transcend family eventually when they grow up and leave the house, either to marry or do whatever, so that they can maintain a humble, selfless attitude toward the part of the world that the Lord is asking them to serve in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that especially if you have a larger than normal family, that's the way that the world is going to see your kids anyhow. They're going to see them coming. They're going to be able to most likely identify something different about them, which they may be able to say, they're Christians, they're homeschoolers. They may assume in one direction or the other that one means one or the other, even though one doesn't necessarily mean the other. Then if you have a large family, they're going to think of the family first. We have people who don't even actually know our individual children's names. They just can identify them as being part of our family. And that's okay. The kids really, honestly, for the most part, most of them don't mind. Some of them chafe a bit, but
From time to time. Age to age.
Age to age, right.
Right.
And then they are identified and known as individuals. Your job, whether you have one child or 20, is to see them first as a child of God, then as the individual that He created them to be, and to run those two concurrently so that you can keep them moving towards their purpose.
They may not quite understand that, but it's a good thing for them as well, because being part of a family allows an occasional slip up from an individual child, and that isn't just completely pinned back on them alone. It comes back, but the family balances it out, because people can say, but they come from a good family and know it's going to work out. You can look at some folks and go, but they're working on that. You can see that as a family, they're working with that individual to keep them on that track that God has them, right?
I believe so, yeah.
I do too. All right, let's say, and we're not anywhere near this, but someday we will. We talk about this. What do we do, when our children are grown and done? Are we done?
No. We have an interesting situation, which not very many listeners, I'm assuming, will run into or or experience in their personal lives. But by the time that our youngest is graduating, we'll have been grandparents for quite a while, I'm assuming. We have a 2-year-old, but our oldest is
We're not
about to turn
grandparents yet.
21.
We don't have anybody married yet.
Right. So, yeah, but our oldest will be 21 in September, which means that I would assume that by the time that our youngest is 10, certainly, he'll have, nieces and nephews. And for us, our seasons will collide.
They will.
We will have a time where we're pouring into grandchildren and children. But for the bulk of our listening base, I'm assuming that you will not necessarily have that. Instead, you will have a short season of empty nest when you graduate your last child and you don't have any grandkids. And then what do? What do you do? Is your homeschooling over? Well, I would like to challenge you to not have it be over, because I feel like because of the growth of the homeschooling community, I feel like it's vitally important that there are voices, especially voices who have run the entire race and stayed through to the end, voices that say you can do this. Encouragement, male and female. I think it is just vitally important that we have a base of people who step up and say, this is worth the effort.
Absolutely.
You can do this. God is in
Absolutely.
it. Keep going.
Paul's letters to Timothy and Titus are full of lots of things, but one of the points that Paul wants to make is the importance of the older generation reaching out and helping bring up the younger generation in the church.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're talking about here. This is what we're asking you to do. If you are on the cusp of ending your family homeschooling time, you're not done. You have so much to give and to share. And you have, I think, a responsibility to say, if you see homeschooling the way that we've been talking about homeschooling as a biblical mandate, then in the kind, loving way that we're called to speak about things, in addition to sharing the gospel as we're called to do, this is an aspect of life that you should be sharing with believers. It really is. We have to, as Heather said, let people know that they can do it and that we think they're called to it.
This past year, I became involved with a group that was totally new to me. And the one question that I had for the person in charge was, am I going to be the old mom? Because I don't want to be the old mom. And I really sat back and started thinking about that. First of all, about my own discomfort at the concept of being construed as the old mom. But really, that's all me-based, and that's all my pride. I have, though I don't feel like it, I have some been there in the trenches wisdom that I can share with people. I don't have all the answers. I'm not even close to saying that. However, I can look at somebody and say, you can do this. Come on. You just soldier on. You really can make it. I can give people the perspective that says, trust me, what you're feeling, what you're going through right now isn't going to be the same. What you're doing with your 4-year-old is not going to look the same when that kid is 20. And that is some valuable stuff. I have been deeply encouraged by some people who were ahead of me on the journey, and I'm very grateful
It's very true.
for that. And we need more people like that. And if you are someone who is newer to homeschooling, please continue forward with the vision of being involved always, of, always being an advocate for, of, hearing your new neighbor looking at her 3-year-old and saying, it's time for preschool, he's 3, and you being able to say, have you ever thought
Doing it yourself.
of doing it yourself? Have you ever thought that you don't need to put them in a classroom? Have you ever considered holding that child close and giving them a totally different, very God-centered, very family-centered experience that gives them a depth of understanding as they go out into the world that will really enrich their lives.
Well, I think that's a great example using the young mom with the preschooler because 9 times out of 10, when we talk to moms and dads of that age, they feel like they have no other choice, first of all, than to put them into some preschool program because that's what society tells them to do. And yet, if you said, would you enjoy doing it at home? Would you? Most will say, "Oh, I wish I could."
Most will say, "I wish I could." As a matter of fact, you know that the image of the mom crying as the child gets on the bus for their first day of kindergarten, you know, has anybody ever stopped and stood alongside that mom as she's putting that kid on that bus and said, you know, maybe what you're feeling is some conviction that it doesn't have to be this way.
And that you already feel within your heart a desire to do it differently.
And that you can do it differently.
And so, dads, you need to be well aware of that also.
Yes.
You have a responsibility to recognize that within your wife, within your child, within your own heart and your own call. And again, to be an advocate to other dads. I will tell you that the whole reason we started this podcast series towards dad is because they're the biggest resistors of homeschooling within the family. It's never the moms. The moms usually are on board well before the husbands are. And the husbands, dads, we do an awful job of one, listening and understanding our wives. And especially when it comes to schooling, because we feel trapped and we don't feel we have the time or the energy to get involved in something like this. And we went to school and we turned out fine. But, we could have turned out better.
Right.
We could have. We could have turned out better. And so I encourage you, if you are an on-board homeschooling dad, you need to start talking to other dads about the joy and the blessing that it has been and how you can encourage others to give it a try, to do it. And then to be a source of continued encouragement for them. You can't just walk away. And we're not called to. We're not called to in any kind of, whether you want to call this ministry or not, we're not called to just walk away generally. We're called to be a part of raising up and discipling, right?
Yeah.
That's not just a one-off.
To continue with a generational vision. You are responsible for so much in your life. And the main thing, truly, the main thing is your legacy, be it with your children, your grandchildren, and having a vision and keeping going and sharing that with others. That is the running of the race of the Christian life.
Right. We are called to look different for a number of reasons, but one of those is so that other people stop and ask, why?
Right. And that's where you have to have your answer.
That's right. And for us, homeschooling has been a large part of the answer to why.
Yeah.
It really has. All those years, as we said in part one of this, my resistance, and now, like almost 15 years later,
You've got the year wrong again. You got the year wrong again. We're almost at 17.
17. I want to be younger than I am.
Hey, let me ask you a question. When our anniversary rolls around, how long have we been married?
Well, guys, 21 years.
21 years. Yes. Good job. Yes.
And it's this month, too.
It's next week.
I know. Glad to have been married to you almost 21 years. And glad to have been doing this homeschooling thing for 15 plus years.
15 plus years.
Math, clearly not my strong point. I'm a writer by trade, so.
Yeah, actually, you're quite good at math, but, I wanted to add one final point. I was able to overhear a group of homeschool dads talking the other day, And I was very encouraged by the fact that they had questions and they were actually seeking answers.
It's good.
And
It's very good.
I want to encourage you, again, be available to people that will have questions. And wives, if your husband has questions, don't be afraid of the answers. Go seek them out. Find families, look online, whatever it is that you need to do to make your family to help your family embrace a lifestyle that will grow you all together in just an atmosphere of love and learning.
Absolutely. No, I think that's good advice. And husbands, I hope you will take it. All right, so we close with another Bible verse.
Absolutely, sir.
I think when you start reading through, if you're looking for verses that relate to raising your children up, there are plenty of them in there, especially Book of Proverbs. But today we're going to look at 2 Corinthians. It's the second half of chapter 12, verse 14. All right, second half of verse 14 out of chapter 12 in 2 Corinthians, which says, "For children are not responsible to save up for their parents, but parents for their children." What that says to me is we have a responsibility to save up, raise up, and prepare our children so that when they are called by the Lord, they have everything they need. That's our responsibility. All right, close in prayer.
Absolutely.
Lord, thank you so much for the time today. We just thank you for these moms and dads who are giving homeschooling a go because you have called them to it. I pray that you would continue to encourage them, continue to bring people around them to support them in their choices, and just to appreciate the joys of the children that you have given to them, knowing that you have, as I always say, created them for great purpose. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.